Unit 7, Period 7, Section 9 deals with the political challenges to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR served from 1932 until 1945 as president, and upon entering office, he's faced with the country's greatest depression. His plan to end the Great Depression was called the New Deal. His goals were relief, recovery, and reform. He referred to them as the three R's. Well, as with any large government program, there are always critics. And one group that was a critic of his plan was the United States Supreme Court. They had found two of his acts unconstitutional on the grounds that the president, who represents the executive branch, was acting like the legislative branch with all of his New Deal programs. Roosevelt referred to them as the ABC programs. The Supreme Court felt like that ought to be Congress's responsibility. So when they found two of Roosevelt's acts unconstitutional, Roosevelt threatened to pack the Supreme Court with 6 more justices. And I'm sure that his goals would have been to put liberal or big government justices in those positions. Well, surprisingly to Roosevelt, there was a tremendous public backlash against this plan. Many critics were in his own Democratic Party, as you can see from this political cartoon with the donkey, and obviously from the Republican Party, as evidenced by the trunk that you see over here to the left in the political cartoon. Roosevelt's acting innocent, but he knew exactly what he was doing. Even though there was a lot of public backlash against Roosevelt's threat, the Supreme Court listened, and they, in the future, laid off of Roosevelt's future programs. And so in the end, Roosevelt was successful. Another critic of Roosevelt during his presidency was actually a supporter of his early in his presidency, and that was Huey Long. Huey Long was governor of Louisiana. As the Depression wore on, his plan to end it was known as Share Our Wealth. And we're going to watch a short video on Huey Long's plan.
I myself would be indeed happy to see our Share Our Wealth program enacted into law. That would mean that I could get out of politics and out of public life. And that is a consummation of my public career which I have desired for some time. But as long as it remains a fight that the people of this country be given a reasonable share of the profits and prosperity of this country, I will undertake to remain in its public affairs and to go as far forward as I can to promote those kinds of programs. We'll not become excited by the newspaper headlines nor by anything that the radio commentators may say on the line that the President has now swallowed our Share Our Wealth program. We'll sit right here and we'll go over to the Senate to help him whenever the time comes, or in any other way that we can, to enact legislation that guarantees a home and the comforts of home to everybody, or which limits the size of the big fortunes as a means of accomplishing the good things to the man and to the people at the bottom. But we've had the promises from the President many, many times, and now we're wanting a fulfillment. No empty words, no empty messages mean anything to us, and no kind of law except one that gives employment and homes and comfort and education to our people will satisfy us in the...
This is a good example of just one critic of Roosevelt during the Great Depression. The third critic of Roosevelt during the Great Depression was A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was an African-American labor union leader of the Brotherhood of Railroad Car Porters. When he discovered that the workers that he was a leader of, railroad porters, were not being paid the same as white workers who did the same jobs in the railroad industry, he threatened a march on Washington, D.C. to protest this action by the railroads. When Roosevelt discovered that this large number of African-American men were going to be brought to Washington, D.C., which was a segregated city still at this time, he invited A. Philip Randolph to the White House for a meeting. In that meeting, Roosevelt asked A. Philip Randolph to postpone the march until he had a chance to influence Congress. With Roosevelt's influence, Congress passed the Fair Employment Act, and that called for an end to discrimination in the defense industries. This is important to note because Roosevelt had a tremendous influence on the defense industries as commander in chief of our military forces in the United States. This is going to be really the first time that we're going to see de facto help for the African American community as it relates to jobs and pay in the workforces of America. This concludes Unit 7, Period 7, Section 9, Political Challenges to Roosevelt's Domestic Leadership During the Great Depression.